Well, guys, it's getting late, but I just want to get this done. I'm not going to be spending much time on the article or the study conducted by a public citizen on forced arbitration, which is ubiquitous. It's everywhere. Yes, reach, reach, reach for that justice. But it is really an uphill battle, and you ain't going to get any. Corporations usurping the laws of individual nations. The TPP is operating. It doesn't matter that Trump signed that executive order and everybody's so wowed he pulled us out of the TPP. Just like the Paris Accord, the climate change agreement. Yeah, what does it mean when you pull us out of an agreement, but you don't enforce the laws of your nation and you allow local, state, and federal officials to enforce an international treaty which needs to be signed by the president and then ratified by Congress. And if those two steps are not taken, then the enforcement of an international treaty is in violation of our Constitution. Oh, but Trump's not doing anything about that. And we have, I don't know, what is it, 396 or 496 mayors across the country who have signed on to the Paris Accord Agreement. We know what's going on in California with Governor Brown, and governors of states have signed on to the Paris Accord Agreement. Okay, but you think Trump doesn't know that? He knows it. He's not doing anything about it. So it doesn't matter what people say. It matters what they do or don't do. And in this case, Trump ain't doing anything about all of these people who are implementing that agreement. The same is true for the TPP. You know, that provision that everybody was up in arms about, corporations can usurp the laws, the rules, the regulations of the signatory countries. Trump, I'm totally against the TPP. Well, guess what? Corporations have usurped our laws, our rules, our regulations for a very, very long time. But it's becoming so obvious now that corporations, we have absolutely become a fascist nation when you define it as government and corporations merging. Well, that's what we are living. Yeah, they put on a good show for us. Oh, they hold those congressional hearings and they propose legislation. The legislation that they propose that corporations don't want passed, what happens to them? Well, let's just take a look. Here, the Arbitration Fairness Act of 2017. And when you understand what's happening with this arbitration thing, corporations mandating it in their contracts and their terms of service, which means that the consumers are forced to arbitrate any dispute that they have with the corporation or the business or the company. And it strips them of their right to file lawsuits in court to be heard by a judge or a jury. Now, our Chamber of Commerce says that it's a voluntary agreement. It's not voluntary when you get to see how whole industries are now, their contracts, their terms of service, they have these mandatory arbitration clauses in them. So, credit card companies, they all have this mandatory arbitration clause. You don't have a choice. It's not voluntary. The only voluntary thing, the only choice you have is, all right, I won't get a credit card. So when you have whole industries, they all including those clauses, it leaves the consumer no choice. So it's not voluntary. And when you have corporations who are recognized legally as persons, how is it that our courts are allowing persons to deny the citizens of this country their right to file a lawsuit? How is it that they're allowing persons to ban class action suits, which these mandatory arbitration clauses effectively do? They ban class action suits. But we also have companies like Bank of America that banned class action suits. How do you ban? It's like me saying, you know what? I'm going to ban having to get a driver's license. I just don't want one. You think that's going to work for me? No. Okay, so corporations are already usurping our rights, our laws, fast and furiously. But when, and I'll show you in a second, when it was found out that these arbitration forums were seen as fundamentally unfair, and there was a lot of press about it, what happens then? We've got congressmen, oh, I'm going to propose a bill, and I'm going to call it the Arbitration Fairness Act of 2017. What happened to it? It died in the House. Hasn't moved anywhere. Our congressional representatives do not represent us. They represent corporations. What a corporation wants, if they want legislation passed, they have lobbyists draft the legislation. They have a congressman or woman propose the legislation, and it gets passed. If they don't want legislation to get passed, they put on a show and it dies. Another event comes along, and suddenly people forget about the Arbitration Fairness Act, because we've got breaking news of another event. I will link below to this article, How Companies Take Away Your Right to Sue. You have no right to a jury or a judge. Your only recourse is private arbitration. And who hires the arbitrators? The corporations. Do you see a conflict of interest there? And people don't even know that they're signing away their rights. So this study, Forced Arbitration, Unfair and Everywhere, I will link below to it, but Public Citizen conducted this study, obtaining answers from many countries, from many companies in particular industries, and found that 75% use mandatory binding arbitration, and nearly 2/3 force consumers to accept these terms as a condition of doing business. Our Chamber of Commerce claims that these arbitration clauses are voluntary. They're not voluntary when they're ubiquitous, when an entire industry is including these clauses. It leaves the consumer no choice. So what they found, it was the Minnesota Attorney General that sued the National Arbitration Forum. It's the largest arbitration forum, debt collection arbitration in the country, because they found it to be fundamentally unfair. When Public Citizen reviewed their cases, arbitration cases, 94%, 94% of arbitration cases were ruled in favor of corporations. The deck is stacked against the consumer. So when Microsoft just changed its terms of services, Microsoft is considered a person in the eyes of the law. And Microsoft is pretty much a total monopoly. 90% of the world's people use PCs. And you want to talk monopoly, it's Microsoft and Apple. That's it. Wow, how did that happen? How is it that we don't have any other companies like Microsoft or Apple? Because it's deliberate, because they want everybody to be on PCs or Macs, because that way they can access the information, they can consolidate all of that information. These companies are not these private corporations. They are working hand in hand with governments to reshape this fabulous world into the new world order, where we will all be slaves. And that noose, the slave noose around our neck, is getting tighter every single day. So 94% of cases, consumers lost. This is the TPP. This is corporate control. And those industries that the Public Citizen looked into, credit card companies, in terms of trying to get the policies from credit card companies, they were told by these credit card companies that they had to apply and get approved of a credit card before they get to see the policy. Automobile dealerships, they were told that they would not get to know what their policies were until they signed the final paperwork in buying a car. Well, when you are faced with this, where people are literally saying, you got to buy the car first before you get to see what the terms of the contract are. This never happened before. But they're hiding something. And what they're hiding is, you have a dispute with us, you don't get to settle it in court. You got to settle it in our tribunal with our arbitrator, and you're going to lose. And guess what? The costs are going to be prohibitive. And you'll get to know those costs before you file for arbitration. You'll get to know that if you lose, you're not only going to be losing the money that you're paying to settle your dispute, but you're going to be paying the attorney fees of the corporation and the arbitrator in some cases. Wow. So that in itself would leave an awful lot of Americans to say, I have no right now. I've been harmed by this corporation and I have no recourse available. And that's what corporations are doing. So credit card companies, 8 out of 10 had arbitration clauses. Bank of America, when all of this came out, all of the press about how arbitration was so unfair, and we had those Congress people, oh, I'm going to propose the Arbitration Fairness Act. Bank of America ditched their arbitration clause, but they still had in their contract, they were banning class action suits. Did I say that? Am I repeating myself? Wow. So, arbitration for credit card companies, 8 out of 10. 3 credit card companies you could opt out of. 5 mandated it, required arbitration. Banks, 5 out of 7. Arbitration, no opt out. Of no banks offered an opt out. Cell phones, 9 out of 10 companies. Only 2 provided an opt out, and 7 out of 10 it was required. Computer manufacturers, 4 out of 9 had arbitration clauses, no opt-outs. Cable internet providers, 6 out of 13 had arbitration clauses. Only 1 provided an opt-out. Home builders. This is ubiquitous, so you can read the study and you can find out. And you know, when you have now these companies like Oath, Verizon, Yahoo, Google, YouTube, AOL, they all set their own terms. And signatures are no longer required in contracts. You just continue to use the service after a certain date, and boom, you're locked into, if anything happens, you got to go to arbitration. This in itself says this country, the individuals in it, are not free. We've got systemic corruption. And when you consolidate, when all of these corporations buy up all of these companies and they consolidate their power, when you have a federal government that has usurped the republic and they have accumulated all their power, when you have centralized government, you have tyranny. We are living in the New World Order. The country, the reality that we lived, is gone. The New World Order, the genesis of it, started probably, it started in the 60s, and it just continued to become increasingly prevalent with all of the agendas being implemented. And now it is so obvious. And keep reaching for the justice. There's the illusion of it. And one day that illusion will be completely shattered. There will be none. And that's where we're headed. Well, on that note, have a good night.